had been driving trucks for years, and after so many miles, most things on the road felt routine. The hum of the engine, the vibration of the wheels on asphalt, the flicker of passing headlights. All of it had a rhythm that I could rely on. But that night, somewhere deep in the northern plains, I learned how quickly that routine could be shattered. I had picked up a late delivery of refrigerated goods in Omaha and was headed west toward a small distribution center near Rapid City. It was early October, and the nights were longer and colder. I had been on the road for over 12 hours, and fatigue was already starting to creep into my muscles and mind. The highway was nearly empty. I counted the occasional distant headlights as they passed in the opposite direction, but mostly it was just me, the endless black ribbon of asphalt, and the soft fog creeping across the fields. I had been keeping a steady pace, careful not to overdo it on this stretch where cell service was patchy and gas stations were few and far between. I checked my fuel and realized I was cutting it close. The GPS showed a small station a few miles ahead, just off an exit that wound down into a low valley. From the distance, the station looked deserted. Its sign flickered weakly, the neon barely illuminating the cracked asphalt. But I didn't have much choice. The fuel light was blinking, and my refrigerator unit was running full blast, keeping my load at the required temperature. As I pulled off the exit, the road narrowed and the fog grew thicker, curling in from the fields on either side. The gas station sat like a lonely island in the mist, its buildings small, old, and leaning slightly to one side. Rusted pumps sat in the lot, some obviously abandoned. I eased the truck into a pump that looked serviceable and cut the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab made my ears ring. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel and bits of debris, and started filling the tank. The cold bit at my face and hands, and the fog made everything seem distant and muted. I felt an uneasy sensation creep over me, a prickle at the back of my neck. Something about the station felt off, but I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just fatigue. Once the tank was full, I climbed back into the cab. I started the engine, the familiar roar of the diesel comforting me. I glanced at the mirrors and noticed a shadow near the tree line at the far edge of the lot. For a split second, I thought it might be an animal, maybe a deer or a stray dog, but it was too upright, too still. I blinked and shook my head, telling myself it was just a trick of the fog and the lights. I pulled out slowly, keeping my eyes on the road, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was watching me. As I merged onto the highway, I felt it, a presence following me. At first, it was subtle, just a flicker of headlights in the distance that seemed to appear every time I glanced back. Then came the sounds, barely perceptible at first, taps against the trailer like metal being struck softly. I froze for a moment, heart thudding. I checked the mirrors, nothing. No other vehicles, no cars behind me. Only the endless dark highway and the fog curling around the headlights. My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to focus. It could be branches scraping the sides of the trailer, small rocks kicked up from the road. Anything. I kept driving. I decided to pull over at the next rest area to gather my thoughts and check the truck. The GPS showed one about 20 miles ahead. I took the exit slowly, eyes scanning every inch of the road. When I reached the lot, the fog had thickened further, settling low and dense. The rest area was barely lit, and the lines of the parking spaces seemed to fade into the mist. I parked in a corner, locked the doors, and sat in the cab, listening. Every creak of the truck, every rustle of the trees, every distant hum felt amplified. My mind raced, imagining scenarios I didn't want to confront. After several tense minutes, I gathered the courage to step out and inspect the trailer. As I walked along the side, I noticed something that made my stomach sink. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel beside me, wide and deep enough to match a heavy vehicle, not a car. They hadn't been there before. I scanned the area, heart hammering. The fog twisted around the trees, and I could barely see beyond a few yards. Whoever had been there had left the tracks and vanished into the night. I didn't wait to see if they would return. I climbed back into the cab, double-checked the locks, and started the engine. I knew I had to get to a place with more people. My GPS showed a small town about 30 miles ahead. I merged back onto the highway, keeping my eyes glued to the mirrors. The headlights appeared again, far behind me this time, keeping pace. The fear in my chest tightened like a fist. I ran every thought through my mind. Lose them in the fog, pull into a well-lit area, call the cops. I chose the latter, deciding that safety was more important than the delivery schedule. The miles dragged on endlessly. Every bend in the road made my pulse spike. Every shadow in the fog seemed like it could be a figure watching, waiting. I kept glancing at the mirrors, noting that the headlights stayed behind me, neither advancing nor falling back. The highway seemed to stretch on forever, straight and unending, the fog thick and oppressive, muffling sound and distorting distance. Finally, the faint glow of the town appeared through the fog. Streetlights, a few shops, and the soft hum of traffic in the distance. I drove straight to the police station, lights inside shining bright. As I pulled in, my chest heaved with relief. I killed the engine and sat for several minutes, scanning the mirrors and the street outside. The headlights were gone. The shadow of the vehicle that had been pacing me all night had vanished. I stepped out slowly, still tense, and reported the incident to the officers inside. They took notes, asked questions, and promised to increase patrols on that stretch of highway. I parked the truck safely in the station lot and rested. Sleep came slowly, my mind replaying the night over and over. I thought about the shadow at the gas station, the taps against the trailer, the tracks at the rest area, and the headlights pacing me along the highway. When I woke the next morning, the sunlight felt like a shield, a small reassurance that the terror of the night had ended. I left the town carefully, taking well-lit highways, keeping my mirrors checked at all times. The delivery was late, but it didn't matter. That night had reminded me that no matter how many miles I drove, no matter how experienced I was, the open road could still be dangerous. People could be unpredictable, and sometimes danger didn't announce itself with a sound or a sign. It could just appear in the fog behind you, following, waiting, testing how far you would go before you reach safety. I learned that night to trust my instincts, to never ignore the feeling of being watched, and to always have a plan for escape. From then on, I never took quiet backroads at night without knowing exactly where I could stop safely, and I never let fatigue dull my attention on empty stretches of highway. The road could be unforgiving, and I had narrowly escaped a reminder of that truth. I had been driving trucks for over a decade, and I thought I had seen just about everything that could go wrong on the road. But that night, somewhere on the back roads of western Kansas, I realized just how wrong things could get. I had picked up a late load of refrigerated freight in Denver and was headed east toward Wichita. It was late September, and the nights were already crisp and cold, with a thin fog settling low over the plains. I had been on the road for nearly 12 hours straight, the hum of the diesel engine and the steady rhythm of the wheels lulling me into a state where every shadow and shape seemed distorted in my peripheral vision. The highway was empty. Mile after mile of black asphalt stretched ahead, lit only by the dim yellow glow of my headlights. I remember glancing at the fuel gauge and noting I was running low, so I started scanning for a gas station. The GPS had me on a stretch that bypassed most towns, the small dots on the screen barely visible. After what felt like another half hour of driving, I spotted a single gas station off to the right, tucked behind a bend in the road, almost hidden by overgrown weeds and a canopy of skeletal trees. Its neon sign flickered weakly, the red letters of gas sputtering in and out. It was the kind of place that looked abandoned until you actually got close. I didn't have much choice. My truck needed fuel, and the next exit was miles away. Pulling in, I noticed the parking lot was cracked and uneven, weeds growing through the asphalt like they were trying to reclaim it. The station itself was dimly lit, and I could see the faint outline of old pumps, rusted and unused, beside a small building that looked like it hadn't had a fresh coat of paint in decades. I parked near one of the pumps that seemed functional enough and shut off the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was almost deafening after the constant drone of the highway. I checked my load, made sure the refrigeration unit was still running, then grabbed my wallet and keys. My boots crunched against the gravel as I walked toward the pump. The night air was cold, sharper than usual. The fog had thickened, curling around the lights in dense, ghostly ribbons. I filled the tank, feeling an uneasy sensation creep over me, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Something about the way the station was lit, the way the fog swallowed the edges of the lot, made me feel like I was being watched. I shook it off, blaming fatigue. After all, I had been driving for hours without a real break. I had to keep moving to make my delivery schedule. Once the tank was full, I returned to my cab and started the engine. The sudden roar felt comforting, grounding me. I put the truck in gear and eased onto the road, trying to ignore the prickle at the back of my neck. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a shadow at the edge of the fog, standing near the tree line. But it was too upright to be a fallen tree or a bush. My heart started to pick up pace, though I kept my hands steady on the wheel. As I drove past, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, broad, wearing dark clothing that blended almost seamlessly with the night. It didn't move, didn't gesture, just stood there like it was observing me. The instinct to slam on the brakes battled with the fear of drawing attention to myself. I pressed on. The further I drove, the more the feeling grew that something was following me. It started subtle, the occasional flicker of headlights behind me that seemed too consistent to be another car. Then came the sounds, metallic taps against the side of the trailer, like nails or small stones hitting the aluminum panels. I slammed on the brakes, heart thudding, and looked in the mirrors. Nothing. No other cars. No trucks. Just me and the endless ribbon of highway disappearing into fog. I tried to reason with myself. The wind, the vibration, branches scraping against the trailer. Anything but someone following me. Still, the feeling didn't leave. I decided to pull over at the next rest area. The GPS showed one roughly 20 miles ahead, and I knew it was better to be cautious than reckless. As I slowed, I noticed tire tracks in the gravel beside me that weren't there before. Fresh, wide, matching the tread of a heavy truck. My stomach turned. I checked the mirrors again, still nothing. But the tracks were real. Whoever or whatever had been there had just passed this way. I felt trapped, a sense of vulnerability I hadn't experienced on the road in years. By the time I reached the rest area, the fog had thickened to the point where visibility was barely 20 yards. The lights were dim and flickering, casting long, trembling shadows across the pavement. I parked in a corner spot, locked the doors, and sat there for what felt like hours, engine idling, trying to calm my mind. Every small noise, the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of an unseen car, the faint groan of the truck settling, made my pulse spike. I ran through scenarios, each one worse than the last, wondering if I had just narrowly escaped someone lying in wait on the highway. Eventually, I decided I couldn't just sit there. I had a schedule to keep, and I couldn't risk losing focus. I started the truck and merged back onto the highway, keeping my eyes fixed on the road and the mirrors. That's when I noticed headlights far behind me again. They were consistent now, staying a few hundred yards back, perfectly matching my speed. No other traffic in either direction, just me and this shadowed vehicle keeping pace. My mind raced. Should I try to lose it? Should I pull over in a well-lit area and call the cops? I was exhausted, but the instinct to survive kicked in stronger than fatigue. I decided to drive to the next town, about 30 miles ahead, a place with enough people to make me feel safe. Every turn, every mile, I watched the rearview mirrors like a hawk. The headlights didn't leave. They mirrored every movement, staying far enough behind to remain unnoticed if I checked over my shoulder too long, but close enough to keep me tense. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tight, my knuckles white. The highway seemed endless, the fog thickening and then thinning in random patches, almost taunting me. Every time I hit a straight stretch, I considered flooring it, putting miles between me and the shadow. But the roads were slick in patches, the fatigue making my reactions slower than they should be. I had to stay in control. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the faint glow of the town appeared through the fog. Streetlights, small stores, a 24-hour diner, life, civilization, normality. I kept driving straight to the main police station, ignoring the nagging fear that I was being followed right up to the door. I pulled in, lights flashing inside the station, and shut off the engine. I didn't move for several minutes, catching my breath, scanning the mirrors. There was no vehicle behind me, no headlights, nothing. My pulse slowly came down as I realized I had made it. Safe, for now. I reported the incident to the local officer, describing the strange tailing vehicle and the feeling of being watched on that stretch of empty highway. They noted my description, asked a few questions, and promised to increase patrols in the area. I stayed in town that night, sleeping in the truck, parked safely in the station lot, and by morning, the events of the night had left me shaken but relieved. My delivery schedule suffered a day's delay, but it was a small price to pay for my safety. The memory of the fog, the shadowed figure, the tracks at the rest area. It stayed with me long after, a reminder that even a life as routine and controlled as long-haul trucking could be abruptly shaken by someone with bad intentions on the road. From that night on, I never took back roads at night without a full plan, never let myself become too comfortable on empty highways, and always stayed aware, knowing that danger didn't announce itself with a knock. It could just appear behind your mirrors, waiting. I had been driving trucks for over a decade, and in all that time, I had grown comfortable with the long hours on the road, the monotony of highways stretching for miles, and the solitude of late-night hauls. The road had its own rhythm, and once you adjusted to it, you could almost predict what might go wrong. But that night, somewhere on a back highway in western Nebraska, I realized that no amount of experience could fully prepare you for the kind of fear that creeps up slowly and refuses to leave. I had picked up a refrigerated load in Lincoln, heading north toward a distribution center near Scottsbluff. It was early November, and the nights were already cold, the kind that made your breath visible the moment you opened the cab door. The road was nearly empty, except for the occasional set of headlights in the distance. I had been driving for 12 hours straight, fatigue gnawing at me, making each mile feel longer than the last. My eyes were starting to sting, and the hum of the tires on asphalt had shifted from comforting to hypnotic. I noticed the fuel gauge blinking low, and the nearest station on the GPS was several miles ahead, just off an exit that wound through rolling farmland. As I approached, I could see it through the fog. A single gas station, isolated, with its neon sign flickering weakly in the darkness. The building was small, old, and leaning slightly, and the lot was cracked with weeds pushing through the asphalt. The pumps themselves looked worn and rusted, some of them obviously non-functional. But I had no choice. I needed fuel and a short break. I pulled the truck into the lot and cut the engine. The sudden silence inside the cab was deafening after hours of engine noise. I climbed down, the gravel crunching under my boots, and started filling the tank. The cold air hit me sharply, and I could see my breath curling in the dim light. I felt uneasy, though I couldn't say why. The fog made everything seem unreal, blurring the edges of the station and the surrounding trees. I shrugged it off, blaming fatigue, and finished fueling. When I climbed back into the cab, I noticed a figure near the tree line at the far edge of the lot. At first, I thought it might be a person coming from the station, but the shape was too still, too upright. My stomach sank. I forced myself to focus on the road and started the engine. As I merged onto the highway, the uneasy feeling followed me. For the first few miles, everything seemed normal. Then I noticed it, a pair of headlights appearing in my rearview mirrors. At first, I thought it was coincidence, maybe a car that had been driving behind me before the station. But the headlights stayed far behind, pacing me perfectly, matching every change in my speed. I tried to ignore it, telling myself that as soon as I picked up a little speed, they would pass me. But they didn't. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, and the fog had thickened, swirling low across the fields. My heart began to race. I could feel the hairs on my neck standing on end. Every now and then, I heard it, a soft tapping against the side of the trailer, like someone was walking alongside me, running a hand along the metal panels. I slammed on the brakes briefly, peering into the mirrors, but the road behind was empty. My pulse pounded. I had been on the road long enough to know that fatigue can play tricks on your mind, but this felt real. Too real. I decided to pull over at the next rest area. The GPS showed one about 20 miles ahead. I took the exit slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the mirrors. When I arrived, the fog was thick, and the lot was almost deserted. I parked in a corner spot and locked the doors. The silence was unbearable. Every small noise, the hum of the engine cooling, the wind rustling through the trees, the distant groan of the trailer settling, felt amplified. My mind raced through possibilities, none of them good. I finally got up and walked along the side of the trailer to check for damage, or anything that could explain the taps I had heard. That's when I saw them. Tire tracks in the gravel, wide and deep enough to match a large vehicle, tracks that hadn't been there when I parked. They led along the edge of the lot and disappeared into the fog near the tree line. My chest tightened. Whoever had been there had been watching, waiting, and could be anywhere now. I hurried back to the cab, locked the doors, and waited. After what felt like an eternity, I knew I had to keep moving. I started the engine and merged back onto the highway, keeping my speed consistent. The headlights reappeared, far behind me but pacing me exactly. Every straight stretch of road, every curve, every hill, they mirrored my movements. My hands ached from gripping the wheel so tightly, knuckles white. My mind ran through escape plans. Should I pull into a well-lit area? Drive into a town? Call the cops? I chose the latter. 30 miles down the road, a small town finally appeared through the fog. Streetlights, a few open stores, and the soft glow of a 24-hour diner offered the first sense of safety I had felt all night. I drove straight to the police station, lights inside shining bright. I killed the engine and sat for several minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. The headlights that had been following me were gone. Whoever it was had abandoned the chase, or perhaps they had been nothing more than a shadow on the road. I reported the incident to the officers, describing the pacing vehicle, the taps against the trailer, and the tire tracks at the rest area. They took notes, promised to increase patrols, and reassured me that I had made the right choice by coming straight to them. I parked the truck safely in the station lot and tried to get some sleep. Even though I rested, the memory of the night stayed with me. The fog, the headlights, the tracks. I had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable on a highway I had driven countless times. When I left the town the next morning, I chose the main highways, sticking to well-lit routes with more traffic. The delivery was late, but it didn't matter. That night had reminded me that experience on the road doesn't make you invincible. People can be unpredictable, and danger can appear silently, pacing just behind you, testing your awareness. I learned to trust my instincts more than ever, to never take an empty highway at night lightly, and to always have a plan for safety. From that night on, I never ignored the uneasy feeling that creeps up in isolation. I made a point to scout routes ahead, stick to populated areas when night falls, and stay alert no matter how tired I was. The road could be unforgiving, and sometimes the only thing standing between you and disaster is awareness, caution, and the choice to act before it's too late. That night, I had acted, and I had survived. But I never forgot the way the dark felt closing in, or the sense that someone had been following me, just beyond the edges of my vision, until the first light of safety finally appeared. I had been driving trucks for close to 20 years, and over that time, I had seen nearly every kind of danger the road could offer. I dealt with snowstorms, torrential rain, blown tires, and drivers who seemed determined to cause accidents. But that night, somewhere on a stretch of highway in rural South Dakota, I realized how quickly familiarity could turn into fear. I had picked up a refrigerated load in Sioux Falls, heading northwest toward Rapid City. It was late October, and the nights were cold and dark, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones when you step out of the cab. The highway was nearly empty. The hum of my tires on asphalt was constant, a monotonous rhythm that usually calmed me after hours of driving. But this night, it only seemed to heighten my unease. I had been on the road for 13 hours straight, fatigue pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake. My eyes ached, my back was stiff, and my hands were sore from gripping the wheel too tightly. The fuel gauge was blinking low. The next station was miles ahead, just off an exit that curved down into a valley. As I approached, I could see the faint glow of the pumps through the fog that had settled across the fields. The neon sign flickered weakly, the red letters of gas sputtering like a failing heartbeat. The station itself was small, old, and leaning slightly to one side. The lot was cracked, weeds poking through the asphalt, and the pumps looked like they hadn't been serviced in years. It was the kind of place you might pass without noticing during the day, but at night, with fog curling around the edges, it felt isolated and unsettling. I pulled the truck in and cut the engine. The sudden silence hit me sharply after hours of the diesel's constant hum. I climbed down, my boots crunching on gravel and debris, and started filling the tank. The fog made everything feel muted, the edges of the building and pumps blending into the darkness. I could see my breath in the cold air. As I worked, I felt a prickle at the back of my neck, an instinctive warning I couldn't ignore. When I glanced toward the tree line at the far edge of the lot, I thought I saw a shape, tall, dark, and still. I blinked, looked away, and told myself it was just a trick of the fog and my imagination. Once the tank was full, I climbed back into the cab. The roar of the engine as I started it felt reassuring. I eased back onto the highway, fog curling around my headlights and muffling the sound of the tires. I had driven barely a mile when I noticed headlights in the distance behind me. At first, I assumed it was a car or another truck, but the more I drove, the more I realized it was keeping pace perfectly. When I slowed, it slowed. When I accelerated, it accelerated. The highway was otherwise empty. No oncoming traffic, no other vehicles behind me, just me and those headlights. I tried to ignore them, telling myself it was coincidence, but then I heard it, metallic taps against the side of the trailer. My stomach sank. I slammed on the brakes briefly, checking the mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. No other vehicles, no figures, nothing. The taps came at irregular intervals, faint but real, like someone brushing along the trailer while running. My pulse spiked, and my hands gripped the wheel tighter. I decided I needed to get to a place with lights and people. The GPS showed a small town 30 miles ahead. Every mile felt endless. The fog thickened, curling along the fields and swallowing the road ahead. My eyes darted constantly between the mirrors and the road. The headlights remained behind me, steady and persistent, never gaining, never falling back. When I reached a rest area a few miles outside the town, I pulled in cautiously. The lot was dimly lit and nearly empty. I parked in a corner, locked the doors, and sat in the cab, trying to steady my breathing. Every small sound, the wind rustling through trees, the hum of my cooling engine, the settling of the trailer, felt amplified, almost threatening. I stepped out finally, walking carefully around the trailer to check for anything unusual. That's when I noticed them. Deep tire tracks in the gravel along the edge of the lot, wide enough to match a large vehicle, leading toward the tree line and disappearing into the fog. They hadn't been there when I arrived. Whoever had left them had been following me, watching, waiting. I climbed back into the cab and started the engine. I had to reach the town. I merged onto the highway, keeping a steady speed. The headlights reappeared behind me, far back but matching my pace exactly. My hands ached from holding the wheel so tightly, my knuckles white. My mind ran through every possible scenario. Drive to a well-lit area, pull into a populated place, call the police. I chose the town, the nearest place, with any kind of assurance of safety. After what felt like an eternity, the glow of streetlights appeared through the fog. Buildings, a few open stores, and the distant hum of traffic felt like a lifeline. I drove straight to the police station, pulled under bright floodlights, and killed the engine. I stayed in the cab for several minutes, scanning the street and mirrors. The headlights were gone. The tension that had held me rigid for hours slowly began to ease. I reported the incident to the officers, describing the headlights that had paced me, the taps on the trailer, and the tire tracks in the rest area gravel. They took notes, promised to increase patrols on that stretch of highway, and assured me I had done the right thing by coming straight to them. I parked the truck in the lot and rested, though the memory of the night stayed with me. The fog, the sense of being followed, the emptiness of the highway hiding a potential threat. When I left the town the next morning, I took the main highways, sticking to well-lit routes and keeping mirrors checked constantly. My delivery was late, but it didn't matter. That night reminded me that experience on the road does not make you invincible. People can be unpredictable, and danger can appear silently, pacing behind you, measuring every move. I learned to trust my instincts more than ever, to never ignore the feeling of being watched, and to always have a clear plan for safety. From that night on, I avoided dark back roads when alone, stayed alert even when fatigued, and remembered that the road is unforgiving. That night could have ended differently if I had ignored my instincts, but I survived by staying aware, cautious, and ready to act. Even years later, I can still picture the fog curling along the highway, the headlights lingering behind me, and the tracks leading into the darkness. A reminder that the road always has surprises, and sometimes survival depends entirely on vigilance. I had been driving trucks for almost 20 years, and I thought I had seen nearly everything the road could throw at me. Snowstorms, slick roads, sudden mechanical failures, reckless drivers. I had handled it all, more times than I could count. But one night, somewhere along a stretch of highway in eastern Wyoming, I learned how quickly routine could turn into something terrifying. I had picked up a refrigerated load in Cheyenne, bound for a small distribution center near Rapid City. It was late October, and the nights were bitterly cold, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible the moment you step outside the cab. The highway was nearly empty, a ribbon of black asphalt stretching endlessly under the dim glow of my headlights. The monotony had dulled my senses, the hum of the tires and the vibration of the truck lulling me into a trance. I had already been driving over 13 hours, and fatigue was pressing down like a weight I couldn't shake. My eyes stung, my back ached, and my hands were sore from gripping the wheel so tightly for so long. The fuel gauge blinked low, and the GPS showed a small station several miles ahead, just off an exit that wound down into a narrow valley. As I approached, the station came into view, its neon sign flickering weakly in the fog that had begun rolling in from the plains. The building looked old, leaning slightly with paint peeling and the roof sagging. The lot was cracked, weeds pushing through the asphalt, and the pumps were rusted, some obviously non-functional. It was the kind of place you'd drive past during the day without a second thought. But at night, isolated in the fog, it felt unsettling. I pulled the truck in, cut the engine, and stepped onto the gravel, which crunched under my boots. The sudden silence inside the cab was almost deafening after hours of the diesel's constant hum. I filled the tank, shivering as the cold air bit through my jacket. The fog muffled sound and light, and for a moment, the station seemed disconnected from the rest of the world. I felt a prickling sensation along the back of my neck, like someone was watching, but I told myself it was just fatigue and the eerie quality of the fog. Once the tank was full, I climbed back into the cab. The roar of the engine as I started it felt grounding, familiar, reassuring. I eased back onto the highway, fog curling around my headlights and muting the sound of my tires. I hadn't driven a mile when I noticed headlights in the distance behind me. At first, I thought it was a car, maybe someone catching up from the previous exit. But as the minutes passed, I realized it wasn't just coincidence. The headlights stayed perfectly aligned with my speed. When I slowed, they slowed. When I accelerated, they accelerated. The highway stretched endlessly, and the fog thickened, wrapping around the fields and swallowing the edges of the road. My pulse quickened. My mind raced. Maybe it was another trucker pacing me, waiting for an exit. But there was no other traffic anywhere near, in either direction. I tried to ignore the headlights, but then came the sounds, soft metallic taps against the side of the trailer. My stomach sank. I slammed on the brakes briefly, peering into the mirrors, but there was nothing. The sound was too precise to be wind or loose cargo, too irregular to be mechanical. My pulse hammered in my ears as fear began to settle in. I decided to get to the nearest town, the only place where I could be sure of safety. The GPS showed one about 30 miles ahead. The miles dragged on endlessly. Every curve, every hill, every stretch of road seemed longer than it should. The fog thickened further, wrapping around trees and telephone poles, distorting their shapes. My eyes darted constantly between the mirrors and the road. The headlights stayed behind me, pacing perfectly, as if testing me, observing me. A few miles outside the town, I saw a rest area on the GPS and pulled in. The lot was dimly lit, cracked, and empty. I parked in a corner, locked the doors, and sat in the cab, trying to steady my breathing. Every sound, the wind rustling through trees, the hum of the engine cooling, the faint settling of the trailer, felt amplified. I forced myself to step out finally, walking around the trailer slowly, checking for anything unusual. That's when I saw them. Deep tire tracks in the gravel, wide and fresh, leading along the edge of the lot and disappearing into the treeline. They hadn't been there when I arrived. Whoever had left them had been following me, watching, waiting. My stomach twisted with tension. I climbed back into the cab, locked the doors again, and started the engine. I had to get to the town. Merging back onto the highway, I kept a steady speed, my hands aching from gripping the wheel so tightly. The headlights appeared again behind me, far off but keeping pace exactly. My mind ran through every possible scenario. Should I try to lose them in the fog? Pull into a well-lit area? Call the police? I chose the latter. The town was the only place I could be sure of any real safety. After what felt like hours, the faint glow of streetlights appeared. Buildings, a few open stores, the hum of traffic in the distance. All signs of life and normality that I hadn't seen in hours. I drove straight to the police station, pulling under the bright floodlights. I killed the engine, stayed in the cab for several minutes, scanning the mirrors and the street. The headlights were gone. The tension that had gripped me for hours finally began to ease. I reported the incident to the officers, describing the persistent vehicle, the taps on the trailer, and the tire tracks at the rest area. They assured me they would increase patrols along that stretch of highway and told me I had made the right choice by coming straight to them. I parked in the lot and finally allowed myself to rest. Even with sleep, the memory of the night lingered. The fog, the headlights, the emptiness of the highway hiding an unknown danger. The next morning, I left town cautiously, taking well-lit highways and keeping my mirrors checked constantly. My delivery was late, but it didn't matter. That night had reminded me that no amount of experience makes you invincible. Danger can appear silently, pacing behind you, measuring every move. From that night on, I trusted my instincts more than ever, never ignored the feeling of being watched, and always had a plan for safety. The road is unforgiving, and sometimes survival depends entirely on awareness and caution. Even years later, I can still picture the fog curling across the highway, the headlights lingering behind me, and the fresh tracks in the gravel, leading into the darkness. That night taught me a lesson I have never forgotten. Vigilance is everything, and even on familiar roads, you can never take safety for granted.
Elle